Charisma Quotient. I'm your host, Kim Seltzer, a dating and makeover expert, where I will help you build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. Are you always left with that feeling that you're not good enough? You know, you try positive thinking, you do these affirmations in the mirror. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. You read all this advice about self-confidence. You read all the self-help books, all of that. But deep down, you're still left with that feeling of not feeling good enough. And you might even feel like a failure. You have low self-worth, and that often stems from a very deep-rooted issue, often stemming from your childhood, and it really kind of bleeds into limiting beliefs that stay with you. And this becomes clear looking at the common reasons for not feeling good enough. And maybe you're directly and regularly telling yourself, I'm not good enough. You're not smart enough, you're not skilled enough, capable, talented. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And this could relate to business, it could relate to your love life. And maybe these aren't the exact words that you say, but when you delve deeper, you realize that the painful feeling pervades and it dictates your actions because you don't pursue a promotion or a request a raise for that reason, or you won't go after that girl or that guy that you're interested in because you think, well, I'm not going to get it anyway. Or you remain in these unfulfilled relationships because you think that that's what you deserve and that's all you can have. But why in your mind, if you have this, would you stand up for yourself? Take a stand and really like go after what you want. So think about that. Like, how is that also impacting your dating life? There may be this inherent need to be with someone. And often this is because you might carry a limiting belief that you don't feel like you're enough. And you rely on maybe that outside validation of what someone provides for you rather than the validation coming within. And I see this happen a lot. You know, they'll come to me and say, oh, Kimmy, find me the man, find me the woman. But really, at the end of the day, it's finding yourself, because when you have that internal validation, that's when you attract something that's healthier. And you're not going to really be able to truly love someone else until you love yourself and see that all that you are instead of all that you're not. And this can play out in the smallest things you might do. You might say, such as like picking apart, a job performance or even other prospects for dating, like not swiping on a profile because there were things in that description that were not good enough. But really what is underneath is the fear of getting hurt. You're protecting yourself from outside criticism. You know, all of this stuff goes on and on and on. And I remember there was this woman I was working on, just to show you an example of this. She had this inner critic of not being good enough, which stemmed from being highly criticized as a child. And no matter what she did, her parents wouldn't give her that validation and acceptance and love that she really craved, especially as a youngster. And fast forward to adulthood, she ended up becoming the quintessential overachiever, trying to gain that validation that she lacked. However, nothing ended up being good enough. And this played out also in her dating life and also the clothes she wore. I remember shopping with her and she tried on this beautiful green dress that she looked stunning in. And she came out of the dressing room and everybody in the store gasped. But no, what was written on her face, it was this crinkling of the nose and looking kind of uncomfortable. And before this moment, she wore a lot of subdued colors and she was clearly hiding and fearful of showing off her feminine flair. And I said, what's going on? Like, why don't you like this? And she said, well, see this roll of fat here? And she was pointing to the side of her stomach. I said, I don't really like the way that this dress kind of points that out. So instead of seeing all that she was in this gorgeousness, this like beautiful woman that everyone was gasping at, she was picking out the detail that she didn't like. And she realized she was doing this with everything. She was doing this with men, her selection process, because deep down, she didn't think she deserved a good man or even to be in that dress, quite honestly. But after much coaching and practicing walking in that green dress, taking pictures in it, dating good men that deserved her, and building her self-worth, her confidence grew and ended up attracting an amazing man in her life. It all started with that like kind of aha moment in the dress. And she didn't really trust in the beginning because she had that limiting belief that she would, that guy would leave her just like all the other men would, that it was almost too good to be true. But in the end, as I had to work with her through that so she wouldn't sabotage things, they stayed together and proved to be a healthy reciprocal relationship. So you can override these gremlins that, call you not good enough, but it does take awareness and work, of course, to override these messages and break habits that don't really serve you. And with me today is an amazing woman who helps others overcome their bad habits and get over their limiting beliefs to achieve what they want. She is an entrepreneur, a podcaster, an aspiring author, and inspiring positivity motivator with a goal to help others soar. And you'll see with her energy, she is so positive. And while spending over 8 years in administration and management work, over 15 years in customer service, being a current licensed real estate agent, and serving as an agent coordinator for one of the largest brokerages in the world for a time, she has obtained an array of knowledge and skill that allows her to put together the puzzle pieces that form businesses based on your unique personalities. She is a powerhouse. Obviously, her passion for authenticity in the business is also really important, and forming a mindset and getting rid of those limiting beliefs in order to be successful. Welcome, Kat Polsinelli. I knew I'm going to botch her name again. Hi.
Thank you so much. You got it the second one. You were doing good.
I know. I did it. I had a limiting belief that I was going to screw up. And because of that, I did a little bit, but I worked through it. Anyway, Kat, it's so great to have you on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because like you and I were talking about off air, what shows up in your love life often shows up in business as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, I actually, I don't know much about you, and I purposely didn't ask more about like your personal journey. I'm so curious how you got here, like how you got
Oh
into all
gosh.
this.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. So, oh goodness. Okay. So as far as a background, it's interesting because I kind of felt like when you were talking, you were kind of giving part of my story away.
Oh,
So
interesting. Yeah.
if you want to have a conversation around, especially limiting beliefs and things like that, the background that I actually enjoy telling people is that it started back when I was 16. So I was your typical, um, everybody knew me, part of everything. I was in softball, I was in track, I was in choir, I was doing all the things. And, my parents had high expectations for me. I decided that, all the other girls had boyfriends, so I needed one, right? Instead of sticking to my guns. So I actually ended up getting pregnant at 16. I did keep my son. He is now 18. And so I swapped schools. I graduated early. I went to college, did all the things that I thought were right. Ended up actually leaving home at the age of 18 due to some headbutting. I mean, I was still a teenager, right? My parents were old school raised on how things should be done. So I moved in with a boyfriend that ended actually in an 8-year abusive relationship. So at the age of 27, I came out with 2 kids. They were 10 and 7 at the time, and a job. I had to buy my first car. I had to buy my first cell phone. I had to file for bankruptcy. It took me a year and a half to get back on my feet to actually get myself in my first apartment. And through that process, I would love to say that I spent time getting to know myself. I did not actually did what most people did. I put it in a box and I shoved it away. I dealt with what needed to be dealt with. I did my medical job, and I went into people pleasing. Anything that my kids need, anything my family needed, anything my sister, anyone that needed anything, I was there, right? Anything I could do to not spend time with myself is what kept me going. I took college courses at night so I could finish my degree. I was very determined, and also distracting myself. So I spent quite a while not focusing on myself, and I got into another relationship. very shortly, after the 8 years, we ended up buying a house together. And what I noticed through that was about 2 years into the relationship, things were going sideways. A lot of the things that I had dealt with were coming back up in that relationship. Everything that was said to me, I took extremely offensive. That started actually projecting onto how I was raising my kids. And so funny enough, I met a lady that did a free facial, and I was like, I've never had one. Let's do this. And she introduced me to manifestation and mindset. And so I started kind of diving into it and like dove in head first, and I fell in love with it. And from that, it really opened my eyes to holy crap, I'm doing the same patterns that I have been doing for 8, 9 years with my ex. I was bringing that into this relationship. I was also bringing it into the way I was raising my children. And being a mom of 2 boys, that really bothered me because I didn't want my kids doing the same thing that they had been raised around at such a young age. And I know we talk about this with how impressionable children are around those years. And so through the digging, I ended up realizing that the person I was with was actually nothing of what I was looking for. I was actually looking for just someone to cling to. I had a therapist that actually gave me a book on codependency, and that was an eye opener. And I was like, holy crap, did not expect any of that. I ended up selling my house to him because we had moved his grandmother in. I moved back into an apartment, started my life all over again, and then actually moved into the real estate. I moved into real estate actually so I could be more with my kids because I worked so much in the medical field. And what was supposed to be planned out was not. But to be honest, it was the best situation that ever happened to me. I was pushed out the door. I was fired unexpectedly, and it made me get into that role, which led into business coaching and personal development. And through my journey of over 6.5 years of the things that I've been through, I now get to help other people work on those limiting beliefs. And to be honest, it's been a blessing because I get to watch the light bulb go off in everybody else's head when I get to give them the advice that I wish I would have had several years before I got into learning about myself.
Oh my God. I love your story and thank you for like sharing it in a very vulnerable way. And I always say we're our own best teachers. Isn't it funny like
Yeah.
how adversity are really like the gifts in disguise because you look back you're like, "Oh, that's my purpose. That's what I learned and now
Yeah.
I want to help others do it." And I certainly am telling my story on your podcast too for those of you who haven't heard my story at nauseum. But no, it's true. And I was curious because gosh, you hit like rock bottom a couple times with those relationships and like just kind of creating those patterns. What were some of your limiting beliefs back then that you were kind of like in your head?
Yeah. So I would say when I was with the abusive one, it was more along the lines of my family had always been together. My family is still together, been together for just over 30 years.
Mhm.
And I wanted that for my kids. Like I craved that kind of perfect relationship, for lack of better terms, because my
Yeah.
family was very private. We didn't learn about any issues within the household. And so I was like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. I was also very hard headed. And so for me, it was like, oh, I can handle it. And for lack of better terms, abuser, my ex, was one of those that was very narcissistic and mental in the abuse. So there was a lot of back and forth where I thought I did something and he'd be like, well, no, it's your fault. Well, if you wouldn't have done this, everything. So I started actually ingraining his beliefs as my own. That's probably the
Yeah.
biggest limiting belief that came across was, I couldn't do this. I shouldn't do that. I needed to make everyone else, especially him, more important than myself. That was the huge piece that I took away from those 8 years. So while a lot of people, their conditioning came from when they were really young, I feel like a lot of my conditioning came in those 8 years. And so when I got into the next relationship, it was kind of the same thing. Like I took care of everything. I cooked meals every single night. I took care of his grandmother. I took care of his kid. Like I worked a full-time job. Anything that I could do to make sure I was like the perfect person, right? The perfect wife, the perfect mom. Like I needed to provide for everyone. That's what I came into that relationship with. But what I realized was, one, I was getting zero time for me and no one was giving back. But two, I started realizing that I had triggers. And so when he would talk with me or he would say things, which I later found out he had a lot of very unresolved trauma he had never dealt with, I was very defensive. And so there was
Mm.
no conversation. And I found myself screaming and yelling and, defending myself. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. And I don't want my kids doing it. And when I started noticing it in my kids, is kind of when it was like, okay, things have to change. My kids have always been that factor when it came to really realizing that things needed to change with me. It was because I started seeing my kids mirroring back the actions that I was doing.
I know kids will do that. And they,
Yeah.
it's like looking in the mirror, right?
Yes.
It's like, "Oh my gosh, that's me," or they're emulating things that you're
Hmm.
not even aware of. Yeah, you said something really interesting because I think I work with a lot of people, and certainly in my history, I've had this too, where women tend to be a lot of people pleasers, and caretakers. And
Yeah.
while it's not like a direct hit with your family of origin, like that, it was like the same as your exes. What feels like could be the same is just these expectations around taking care of others. And
Hmm.
so I wondered, if you could share a little bit about that role, maybe that you even had as a little girl growing up, and how that kind of carried through with some of the relationships until you stopped it. Because that's the thing, like you think you're being nice and a caretaker is like a good thing. And it is,
Hmm.
it's not to get rid of that beautiful quality. But to your point, there's a lot of consequences that fall out when you don't like also express your needs and what you want.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I will say in doing some deep dives into myself and things like that, I was the oldest of us three girls.
Oh, that,
I was
yeah,
that one.
yeah.
And
Me too, by the way.
when
Yeah.
so when I was younger, I was always high achieving. I was always, striving to do more. I was a daddy's girl. So anything my father was involved in, I wanted to make sure he was extremely proud. So the first kick to the face with that was when I had to tell him I was pregnant at 16. That's kind of the first connection I have to like really feeling shameful
Mm.
in that sense. But I was always a high achiever. I was always in sports.